So Paul Kirschner, also known as, by I guess his by his admirers as educational realist, also known by his friends as the grumpy old man, is a professor emeritus at the Open University of the Netherlands. He's an honorary doctor at the University of Oulu in Finland and a guest professor at Thomas More University of Applied Sciences in Flanders, Belgium. Paul also owns his own educational consultancy company, Kirschner Ed, and prior to his retirement, he was a distinguished university professor and professor of educational psychology at the Open University of the Netherlands, and visiting professor of education at the University of Oulu in Finland. Paul's talk today is titled Don'ts and Do's of Online Teaching and Learning. What does the research say? Now, there was a lot of talk in the last few years of fake news and alternative facts, and most of the focus was on politics. But in fact, there was so much nonsense and misleading statements that I heard in the last 11 months that are related to online teaching and learning. Anyone who taught a class via Zoom became an expert, and anyone who participated in such a session felt they can critique online education, discuss the future of online education with confidence. For me, and I assume that for many of us in the educational technology field, this was very frustrating. So Paul's talk, in which he will look at a number of these myths from the perspective of what cognitive science and good research in the field have to say about them, is promising to be very valuable. And Paul will also offer suggestions as to what we should do. But in order to convince you that, unlike many others, Paul is worthy of our attention, here are a few more facts, not alternative, not fake, about Paul. So he's clearly an internationally recognized expert in his field. A few notable examples of his expertise are his presidency of the International Society for the Learning Sciences and his status as fellow at that society and research fellow at both the American Educational Research Association and the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences and Humanities. He was also a member of the Scientific Technical Council of the Foundation for University Computing Facilities, as well as of the Dutch Educational Council, where he was advisor to the Minister of Education. Paul published approximately 400 scientific articles, as well as hundreds of popular scientific articles and blogs for teachers and school administrators in both English and Dutch. He's also author and co-author of a number of very successful books, including How Learning Happens, seminal works in educational psychology and what they mean in practice, Evidence-Informed Learning Design, 10 Steps to Complex Learning, which is now in its third revised edition and was translated into Korean and Chinese, and 2 different volumes of Urban Legends, talk about fake news, and Urban Legends about learning and education, also in Dutch, Swedish, and Chinese. He also co-edited 2 other books, Visualizing Argumentation and What We Know About CSCL. He's also chief editor of the Journal of Computer Assisted Learning and commissioning editor of Computers in Human Behaviors. I'll now summarize. Paul's areas of expertise include lifelong learning, computer-supported collaborative learning, designing electronic and other innovative learning environments, open educational resources, media use in education. This sounds like the list of topics and sessions we have in the conference. Media use in education, development of teacher distance learning materials, use of practicals for the acquisition of cognitive skills and competencies, design and development of e-learning and working environments, and innovation and the use of information technology, educational systems. One final sip, Paul, and the floor will be yours. If people have questions, they're welcome to post them on chat. You can write them in English or in Hebrew. I'll try to monitor the chat and get the questions to Paul probably at the end of the session, unless there's something that's very unclear, and then I'll jump in. And I see that people are already on chat, so that's great. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, it is very early in the morning here. Good morning to everyone. It's really strange. I'm talking to a camera and a computer screen, and I know there are people out there. And as a professor of computer-supported collaborative learning and things like that, you would think that I really enjoy doing this type of thing, but I prefer standing on a stage in front of people and interacting with them. But I'll do my best here. You can see the title of this slide. You'll notice that I don't read my slides very, very much, because cognitive load theory tells us that redundancy is one of the worst things you can do. Never read your slides for your students. It impedes learning. I'm not going to be talking about that later today, but it's okay. But you'll notice that of me. The first thing I would like you to do is, if this thing works, yes?
I believe we're not seeing the slides yet, so I don't think we started sharing. So.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Why isn't it sharing? I shared it with you.
We tried it, yeah, of course. We tried it before, it worked. Why should it work again? This is technology.
Escape. Okay, let me go back to the original view. Zoom. We tried this before. It worked. Share screen. This one. Share.
Very good. We can see.
Okay, and if it's proper.
It's not yet. It's still the general view, not the.
Now it should be.
Now we see presenter view.
Okay. We tried this, and people. This is why I hate this. We tried this out, and it worked, and now it doesn't. Okay.
And now it does again.
Okay. That's 1 minute and 33 seconds that I've lost already. I'm going to start again.
This is the Middle East, Paul. We're good.
No okay, perfect. The first thing I'll say to you is this. You're giving online education, and I'm giving an online lecture. And I know everybody is really busy, and they have all of these things in the background, like their iPhones and WhatsApp and Twitter, their mail, Facebook, Instagram, and whoever knows what other types of things. If you're busy with that, you're thinking about that and not listening to me. So I'm just asking you to spend the next 40, 45 minutes away from your addiction, and to just spend some time listening to my horrible voice and watching the things that I'm going to say that you probably might not like. Because I have the idea that this is a conference on innovation and technology, and that I'm walking into the lion's den at the moment. Because I have all of these people who are in love with electronic media and making use of media in all different ways. And what I'm going to be doing is telling you not to do it, but problems that you can have with it. Because there are a lot of urban legends in it. Here you can see two of them, the unicorn and Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Those are things that people think exist, but have never been proven to be true. So it's very anecdotal. Yes, I saw it. But as I say sometimes, please don't tell my granddaughter Elsa that unicorns don't exist, because that wouldn't be very, very nice for her. But for adults, you can do that. And the question is, if you have this in education, and my answer to that is yes, unfortunately, that's the case. And I can go through a whole list of these types of myths. Listening to Mozart while your baby is in your womb will make that child smarter, or the learning pyramid. If you hear someone, if you give a lecture, it's 5%, but if you do it yourself, it's 80%. Those are all different types of myths in education that people believe in, which have been proven not to be the case, where there's scores and scores of good research showing that it doesn't exist, that people are right-brained and left-brained. That's all balderdash. But I'll be talking about myths that primarily deal with making use of technology. And the first is that kids or the people are capable of multitasking. You have to realize this term came in 2000. We started thinking about this. I often show this slide with it, showing you that even teenagers can't multitask because her teacher is distracting her. We have to know, to begin with, what a multitasker is, because most of the people that I meet up with really don't know what multitasking is. Now you can see it here on the slides, on the slide. What it means is, and it comes from the world of computers, that you have multiple processors in your head that are capable of carrying out 2, 3, 4, 5 different things in which thinking, information processing is necessary all at the same time without them affecting each other, without one of them slowing down the other one or making you less accurate. And that works in a computer in which you have a dual core or a quad core or an 8-core computer. Most of us have laptops now with at least a quad core, which means you can do 4 different information processing tasks. The computer can do that at the same time, because what's happening in CPU 1 doesn't affect CPU 2 or 3 or 4. When they're all trying to leave at the same time and go through the same bus, that could lead to slowing down, but the processing happens completely independent of each other. Think of it back in the Stone Ages, where we only had one CPU, an 8028 or something like, or an 8016 in our computer, and each new process that you did had to wait for the other one. Well, that's what happens in our brain, because although we have a left and a right half, and all of the different parts of the brain, in anything that we're doing, in listening to me and looking at this slide, you're making use of all different parts of your brain at exactly the same time. It's not that you can listen to something in one part of your brain and see something in another, and they don't affect each other. If you're listening to something in one part of your brain and you're trying to read something in another, the listening and the reading are both semantically processing things in your head, and they will interrupt each other. What we actually have is what I call a task switcher. And you can see it here in the slide. I hope you can see my cursor. Yes, is that the case? Okay. You start on a task. Let's say you're busy making a lesson plan for tomorrow and you're working on it, but you have your email open, and all of a sudden the email comes in and it catches your eye, that blip, and you see that it's from Yoram. And Yoram says, yeah, Paul, we have to do something tomorrow with the conference, and Tעשה has decided this and this, or Ina has decided this and this. And at that point in time, I'm now no longer thinking about my lesson plan, but I have to switch and think about the conference today. So I leave one cognitive schema and I go to another cognitive schema. And I pay a switching penalty because I have to get rid of the old one and bring the new one up and get into it. And into it, I'm thinking about it, and it's like, okay, Ina wants this, and how am I going to react to it? And I react back to Yoram. I think I said, Ina's always making problems here. Yeah, I don't know why, but she's always making problems. I'm really getting tired of it. And what do? I don't send it back to Yoram, but I send it to reply all. Why? Because my head is still partially in that original schema. I have a remnant of my original cognitive schema, and I make a mistake, an accuracy mistake, and that email goes to everyone, which I didn't want to happen. Okay, think about that. Maybe I didn't even know I did that. I come back to my first task, and at that first task, then I have to get back into my lesson plan because I was busy thinking about what Yoram had said about what Ina had wanted in the conference, and now I have to get back into my lesson plan. And that costs me, again, a certain amount of time. There's, again, the switching penalty when I restart. And there's been studies in management sciences that it takes can take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes to achieve the same level of working when you get back into your original task. That's how much of a penalty you can pay. And what are the consequences of all of this? Well, first of all, it takes longer time to master something. There have been great studies. One really good study that was carried out they let a group of students read something to mastery, a small piece of text. It took about 5 minutes to read it and learn it to mastery. And what do we mean by mastery? They were capable of reproducing it or writing a good summary of it or answering questions. It really doesn't matter. They mastered it. And they had another group, and that group got every once in a while a text message. And what they found is that those students could also learn that text to mastery, but it took about 8 to 9 minutes. So it took about 1.6 to 1.8 times as much time to learn it to mastery. Okay, so it's great. You can task switch and learn something to mastery. But what did we see when I did a piece of research with Aaron Karpinski in the United States? The people got lower grades on a scale of 10, about 1 to 1.5 points lower. In English, in American, I would say it was kind of like instead of getting an A, you got a minus or a B plus, about a half a GPA point between. You say, well, but they could learn it to mastery, lower grades. Well, we found in our research is that they didn't spend that 1.6, 1.8, let's call it 2 times as much time studying it, the multitaskers. Yeah, because we compared multitaskers to non-multitaskers. And we found this grade difference. But we also looked at how much time do they spend on the internet, how much time do they spend studying, are they disruptive multitaskers? That means they stop what they're doing and start doing something else. Or are they non-disruptive multitaskers? They see that it comes in, but they wait before they do something. And we found that if you stop doing one and go over to the other, you just get lower grades but they don't spend any more time on studying. We also see that reaction times are slower. And here was a great study by Strayer and colleagues. And what he found was that he got 3 groups of people in a driving simulator. And one group was just driving in the simulator. One group was driving and received a telephone call every once in a while. And one group was driving legally drunk. And what they found was that those who were driving legally drunk drove as well as those just driving. They had no accidents. The reaction times were just about the same as the control group. And who did it worse? The people who were answering their telephone every once in a while. They were slower to react, slower to hit the brakes, slower to get back into traffic, and also had more accidents. And it didn't matter if it was in their hand or hands-free, because it's not about what your hands are doing. If that was the case, you couldn't scratch your face while you were driving. It was because their thoughts were somewhere else. And in the debriefing afterwards, they asked just a simple question in the debriefing, and that was, what was the color of the jacket of that little girl who came out between the cars? And what they found was the drunk people and the normal drivers said red. And the people who were on the telephone said, what little girl? So they didn't even see or register that there was a dangerous driving situation. Now we see from research of Strayer that there's a loss of concentration, that intensive multitaskers are not capable of inhibiting paying attention to non-relevant stimuli. And the more you multitask, the less capable you are of not paying attention, so neglecting irrelevant stimuli. And we also see classical addiction phenomena, and we all know it. You walk out of the house, you don't have your telephone with you, and you break into a panic. I don't have my telephone, and I'm outside, and I'm walking, and I don't have my telephone. So But what should you do and don't do? Don't allow switching in your class. Don't encourage switching in your class. When you get into the class, it should be close your laptop, put away your mobile devices. You're now listening to me. Encourage monotasking and have kids experience the difference. Have them experience themselves, set up live lab experiments with them in which they can see that if they've been multitasking while you've been saying something, if they get an examination afterwards, a quiz afterwards, that they score worse than those who didn't. Let them experience it in two different ways. Because just telling them, just like telling you, won't work. The second myth is, let's let the kids take notes with their laptops. That's one of the complaints that you hear, if we go back to my previous slide, in which I said, don't allow switching, have them close their laptops. The first thing you hear is, yeah, but I needed to take my notes for the class. Yeah? And I need it because then I can share it. My handwriting is really horrible. I can't read it. So I need it for my notes. Yeah, but the problem is most students nowadays can type faster, or at least as fast as the lecturer can talk. It's kind of like a court stenographer. The person is sitting with a little machine, and if you ask the stenographer what was just said, the stenographer can't tell you. They have to look at the paper and they read it back verbatim. So that's what happens with a student typing notes on a laptop. They're typing verbatim what you're saying, and they're not thinking about it. And what's important to know is that learning, you don't learn unless you process information. If you're lying there and you just hear things in the background but don't pay attention to it, you don't learn. So if you don't process, you don't learn. If you only process something at a very surface level, at a shallow level, you won't learn it at a deep level. You'll learn it at a shallow level. If you process it deeply, you'll learn deeply. The deeper you process it, the more you think about it, the better you learn it. And the more you process it and the more different ways you process it, the better the learning and the better the retention. And I put this for the more science-oriented, natural science, mathematics-oriented people in the audience. They can read this. This is the sum of the different numbers and ways of encoding something, plus the sum of the different number and ways of retrieving something. That leads to learning and better learning. And they're all different ways to encode things and to retrieve it. I mean, we know about retrieval practice, for example, giving quizzes, writing summaries, using flashcards, exit letters when you leave the classroom, all of these types of things. So what do we know? When we studied taking notes by hand or taking notes with a laptop, we found that those who took notes with pen and paper, pencil and paper, scored better directly after the lesson. So there was a lesson, everything aside, you got a quiz. Those who wrote notes did it better than those who were typing their notes. But the thing was, also after a week, even if they were allowed to look at their notes. So those students who had typed the verbatim notes were allowed to study their notes before the exam a week later. And those who had written by hand on pencil and paper were also allowed to look at their notes. And we saw that those who had written it by hand also scored better after a week. You say, hey, that's strange. Why did that happen? They looked at the verbatim, exactly what the professor had said. Yeah, and the reason is very simple, because when you take notes, you have to process the materials. If you can't write as quickly as someone can talk, you have to summarize, you have to paraphrase, you have to choose the main points. In other words, you have to think about what I'm saying. It's just that simple. Yeah? So it's very normal right after hearing this and getting your quiz that you score better because you've thought about it. The other ones haven't thought about it. It's just gone in their ears and out of their fingers. Yeah. After a week, you'd say, yeah, but you had better notes verbatim, not your summaries or paraphrase or whatever. But you have to realize those who had taken those notes by laptop were now processing the information for the first time. Those who were looking at their handwritten notes were now processing it for the second time, but also processing it more deeply because they read the paraphrase, the summarization, and they had to think back, yeah, but what did that grumpy old man actually say? And what example did he give? Because they couldn't write that all down. So they were processing it more deeply. So they learned it better. So what don't you do? Don't allow notes on a laptop or any other device. And if the student says, yeah, but I want to have it somewhere on my computer so that I can find it, say to them, invest a certain number of euros and buy a smart pen. Write it down with a smart pen. And after you're done, plug it into your computer and you can see it perfect in Arial or Garamond or Times New Roman. You have it on your computer, but write it down by hand. So, but what you have to do is you have to teach your students how to take good notes. You have to teach them how to summarize. And I say this for a reason, because we had 17, 8-year-old academic high school students, and we did an exam, we did a study of taking, having them read and reread, having them read and take an examination or a quiz, and having them read and summarize. And we thought the summarize would be their best. Yeah, so just rereading would be worst. Reading and taking a quiz would be better. And reading and summarizing it afterwards is a perfect retrieval practice. We do that. But that didn't work. So I said to my PhD, Kim, that's what you do as a professor. You say to your PhD, do something. And he said, take a look at the summaries. And she did. And they were horrible summaries. These were 16, 17, 8-year-old pre-university students who still weren't capable of taking notes and writing summaries. So if you want them to do something, you have to teach them how to take notes, how to summarize, how to outline, and teach them how to study, how to make use of retrieval practice, space practice, variability of practice, those types of things. If you don't mind, I'm going to have a sip of tea. The third is that laptops are the new secondhand smoke. You can see herein illustrated the person next to the person at the laptop. You can see her eyes are looking somewhere else. And as I said, learning depends on attention. And researchers found that people who use their own laptop and change from, are busy during the lesson, we'd like to think if we see the back of their laptops that they're studying, that they're doing what they should be, but 40 to 80% are busy with completely different things. And in an NS1 study, and I'll show you the study in 1 second, a teacher told students, put your telephone on the desk, your mobile phone on the desk, put the bell, the ringer, and the chime and thing at the highest possible sound. And for the rest, we're just busy with something else. Just, it's there. And what they found was this. This is the number of times within a lesson that a class of 30 students got messages on their telephones. Yeah. Let's go back. One study, one lesson, 165 emails, 210 Instagrams came in, 360 WhatsApps came in, and 32 telephone calls arrived in this one 40 to 45 minute session. This is what's happening to your students while you're giving a lesson. I know it's an NS1 study, but I thought it very exemplary of what happens and why you should not have people do this. But 40% say that it's not only their own use, but they're distracted by others. And you can see it here. First, you see here the effects of multitasking on lecture content. You see those who, on the left-hand side, those who are multitasking score more poorly than those who are just listening. Okay, that's normal. But what happens when somebody sitting next to them is multitasking on the computer, watching Game of Thrones or reading the newspaper or checking their email? We see that those with a view of a multitasker score significantly lower than those with no view of the multitasker. That means if I'm sitting next to you and you're doing something on your screen, I will score lower than the person sitting next to me who can't see your screen. And so 75% of the multitasking, I said, did do something else, and 40% were partially or completely distracted. So don't allow mobile devices unnecessary for the lesson. And don't cave into parents, because parents will come and say, well, my child is a visual learner, or is a this learner, or whatever, and or doesn't write very well, or is dyslexic and can't write well, whatever. Don't cave into them, because if you do, all you're doing is killing their learning. As Dick Clark called it, you're being mathemathantic. But create online moments. Say at a certain time, open your laptop, and now we're going to do this simulation. Or, okay, let's go to this poem and go through it and read it in iambic pentameter, whatever. It doesn't have to be a hard science. This can be anything. Make use of the computer in the classroom, but for things where it's necessary, where you can use paper and pencil, use paper and pencil. So this is it. The next thing, we constantly hear the kids walk around with 20 pounds of books on their back, and all of these educational companies are going over to ebooks and putting all things online. You think, okay, reading is reading. So what does it really matter? If I can let them walk around with one reader instead of 10 books in their backpack, why don't I do that one reader? And there's a reason, and I'm not going to read this. You can go through it yourself. Well, let me take the time. Go read it, please. From your screen. Sorry, it's not on paper. To summarize this, although you read as quickly and you think you're understanding it better and learning it better, if you're learning from electronic material on screen, and that doesn't matter if it's an e-reader or if it's a computer screen, you will learn the gist just as well, but the details you won't. That's the more specific questions, and there's no difference between them. Other research has shown that there is a difference, and that there's a difference if it's an e-reader or if it's an interactive program, because in the interactive program, students then can also make use of hyperlinks and can do what my dearly beloved and recently passed away colleague, Davy Solomon. Excuse me? Okay, I'm hearing somebody talking in the background. Gabriel Solomon called that the butterfly defect, of people who flitter from one to the other interesting thing and kind of lose sight of the main point of where they're busy. So an e-reader in any event is worse than reading from a book. And I can go into deep psychological reasons and topological reasons. I won't. But further research has shown that doing it from a screen, an interactive computer, is worse than doing it from a tablet or an e-reader, because of the fact that you're constantly going with hyperlinks. So try to keep as far away from reading online as possible. have people print things out, make use of open educational resources. I know you'll continue to make use of these types of things, but try to minimize it. If learning is important, try to minimize it, is my clue. Another one is that kids are digital savvy, media savvy digital natives. That was year 2000, that was Mark Prensky. He saw kids doing things. He never studied it. He saw something, concluded something, and never experimented to see whether it was the case. And he thought kids can multitask. And a colleague of mine in the Netherlands, Wim Veen, came up with this idea of Homo sapiens. And that was this generation of students that was capable of all the things that I've written on the slide without any instruction. It's why? Because they were surrounded by digital materials their whole life. It's kind of like, I've never known a period, I'm 69. I've never known a period in my life, I was born in the United States. I've never known a period in which we didn't have a car, a television, or a radio. But I am definitely not a Formula One car driver, nor am I a television star, nor am I a radio presenter, although those things were around me my whole life. There's no such thing as osmosis, that because it's there, you can automatically do it. You have to learn how to act, to enunciate, to present, to drive a car, to drive a racing car. As I said, my dear colleague, Gabriel Salomon, he was peace professor in Israel. He called it the butterfly defect. I call it the attention deficit hyperlink disorder. So don't be fooled. Don't believe the eduquacks and new age prophets who say, you don't need it. Everything's on Google. We'll get into that in a second. Learning facts isn't necessary. Kids can do it on their own. Put a computer in the wall, the hole in the wall from Sugata Mitra, and kids will magically learn from it. It doesn't work. If you're going to use a technique, learn beforehand what they can do with it. Don't assume that because they are tech savvy, that if you give them a task to do something with the computer, that they can do it. For example, don't assume that they can actually find information properly on the internet. Yeah, have them acquire skills and use good explicit instruction. One thing I constantly hear, and I think you also hear, is that knowledge is as perishable as fresh fish. The half-life of information is incredibly short. Now, if that was the case, I'm 69. I still wouldn't remember that Chad is in Africa, because I learned that I was probably in 4th grade in elementary school. That makes me 10 years old, 59 years. And it's probably not true, because information, this knowledge is perishable. It's not. All that I've learned and all that I've retained through my good teaching and good learning is still there. Yeah, I'm getting older, I forget things, but that's also a part of the learning and memory process. What's the case is that there's an incredible increase in the amount of information and the number of information sources around us. But that doesn't make all that I've learned suddenly wrong. The classical physics of Isaac Newton still exists and still works and is still what we use when we're talking about large bodies. And I'm talking large bodies, I'm talking about anything larger than an atom. And we're talking then about in the 1700s. And quantum physics, which was Niels Bohr, 1906, if I remember correctly, quantum physics also works, and that's 115 years ago. And it works for subatomic particles. It's no longer true because it's 115 years old. But we have constantly new information. But you need that old information to judge the veracity of what's new. Without that old information, we get to the next one. It's great that it's all on the web. But if it's all on the web, How do you understand it? How do you read it? How do you interpret it? It's how do you choose between all of the things that you find on the web? I mean, if you go Google something, if I was to Google learning styles at this moment, you would end up with an incredible number of articles about learning styles, but do you have any idea if what you're reading is true? So there are many unreliable sources. By the way, learning styles don't exist, period. No, I know your daughter, your husband, your wife is a visual learner or an auditory learner. That's what we call, let me keep it clean, male bovine excrement. For those who don't understand that, I'll shorten it to BS. For the rest, I won't say what it is. Yeah, but it's not about searching. I mean, if I type something into Google, I'll find a lot. It's about finding and evaluating and properly using it and knowing it. And one of my favorite stories is when people, a certain journalist had to write an article about Sir Francis Bacon, the, let's say, founder of the scientific method. And that this man was a 16th century natural philosopher. That person wrote the article about this man, which is also Sir Francis Bacon, but was a 20th century modern artist. Why? Because if you went at that time on the internet, the first 10 hits you would get, 9 of those 10 would be about the artist. The article writer apparently didn't know or didn't understand what a natural philosopher was, what the 16th century was, or what the scientific method was. So please don't assume that kids can use the web effectively, because they can't. They're very much capable. I see someone now talking on the telephone while I'm doing this, so she's really not hearing what I'm saying at all. Yeah. Don't assume it. You have to teach them how to use it properly. And that doesn't mean using the web in a course in Hebrew, in Ivrit, or in English, and teaching this is the way you use the web, or using it in a web courses using the web. You have to use it in all courses, in science, in geography, in literature. You have to constantly have students make use of it and check whether or not they've used it well, because you need to use it in all of the subjects. You can't have a separate course learning from the web or becoming tech savvy. It's something you have to integrate in all of your courses. It's kind of like you don't learn to write only in a course in mother language. You write in all of your courses. And finally, the last one is the idea that media really make a difference. And I'll give you just a few examples. I'll give you the science behind it. But this is what Thomas Edison said. First, when he was dealing with the phonograph and then with the radio and motion picture. If you read the last one, I believe that the motion picture is destined to revolutionize our educational system, and that in a few years it will supplant largely, if not entirely, the use of textbooks. This was 1913 and 1922. In 1923, Revesz and Hazewinkel wrote this article and published it. Okay? On the didactic value, you could say the educational value of lantern slides and films. This is 1923. And this is what Revesz and Hazewinkel found. And they said in 1923 that the alleged didactic importance is not well founded. And Gunning in 1925 wrote that you need to fit the technology into your existing repertoire of instructional techniques and apply them only after careful study and knowing what they're doing. And we knew that in 1923 and 1925. We had to wait until 1983 that Dick Clark wrote this seminal article, Reconsidering Research for Media, in which he stated this: that media influences student achievement about the same way that a grocery truck changes our nutrition. It's not the thing that brought it to you, it's the content of it. And he went further, and in 2014, well, actually in 2005, he wrote 5 common but questionable. In 2014, he wrote with David Feldon 10 common and questionable. And in the 2020 Cambridge Handbook of Multimedia, his chapter is on 15 common but questionable, because it hasn't been published yet. I'm only doing the 10, but these are the questionable reasons that he discussed. Things like media leads to more learning, or it's more motivating, or whatever. And he disproves that. And that autonomy and control is endemic to media, or the authentic learning environments and activities. We want to create that, and that's why we want to make use of it. It's the teaching, it's the medium is not the method. To quote, I think it was George Bush, he said, "It's the economy, stupid. The medium is not the message. It's the method. Your medium is no more than a tool. No more than a knife is a tool in the hands of a cook. And in the hands of a good cook, it's useful in making a beautiful meal. And in the hands of a bad cook, it's something that I wouldn't want to eat." So what I'm saying here is beware of what for me is the unholy trilogy. And the unholy trilogy is myths about learning. And I only did 8. I could have given you 80. The gurus and the eduquacks who are walking around and telling you how media are so important and so much better, and that you're a fossil, you're a dinosaur if you want to give good instruction. And I could have added to this the edupreneurs that are now selling us things because we're now in a corona crisis, and they've seen their opportunity with the moral panic to sell all of their trinkets and wares. And the anecdotes of people who say, "Yeah, but in my class." I often say when someone confronts me with an anecdote, I said, "Do you have a second anecdote? Because if you do, then we can call it data." Anecdotes aren't scientific proof. If you've enjoyed this or found it interesting, I'd say you can follow me on my English language blog, which is 3-Star Learning Experiences. Why is it called 3-Star Learning Experiences? Because I myself was a chef cook, and I cook every day. And for me, the greatest thing in the world is a 3-star Michelin cook and going to a 3-star Michelin restaurant. So it's called 3-Star Learning Experiences, that we want to have teachers be 3-star educators. If you want to know more about myths, as Yoram said, I have 2 books, Urban Myths about Learning and Education, and More Urban Myths about Learning and Education, Challenging Eduquacks' Extraordinary Claims and Alternative Facts. And if you want to learn more about the science behind all that I've talked about, you can go to this book, How Learning Happens, Seminal Works in Educational Psychology and What They Mean in Practice, especially written for teachers, teacher trainers, and students at teacher training institutes. I hope I entered the lion's den, and just like Daniel, that I haven't been completely devoured alive by you. Thank you very much. In 42 minutes and 13 seconds, I am now going to stop sharing. I'm back, and I'm available for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much. Well, regarding the Lion's Den, I will have to quote Dubi Weiss, who posted in Hebrew, but he said this sounds like Dawkins talking in the Vatican. But I think I think that's a huge compliment. So
thank you very much.
I'm not sure it's about us, the Vatican, but clearly for you. There were some comments and there were some questions. I'll start with one that is that we all experience. For example, me moderating this, answering to some chat while you were speaking, responding to things. When we teach online, we have no choice. This is on behalf of Ayelet Becher, and she's saying, Ayelet is saying, we have to multitask when we teach online. What are the consequences of that?
The answers, are you talking about for the teacher or for the student?
For the teachers, yeah.
You give a poorer lesson.
Yep.
It's that simple. I'm talking to you. I noticed that someone was on the telephone. I'm sorry that I shamed that person, but I usually also do that when I give a normal keynote. If somebody's telephone goes off, I usually say to them, "Oh, could you please tell them I'm giving a lecture at the moment and that I can't answer the phone." And then you see everybody go and turn off their telephones because they don't want to be named and shamed, those types of things. Nothing else than that you're giving a poorer lesson. Just like if you're driving and talking on the telephone, you're driving more poorly. Your attention is somewhere else. So you're not thinking as deeply about what you're telling. You're not noticing the puzzled looks on the faces of the students on your screen, so that you see that someone in your audience really, or a couple, don't understand what you're saying. And what you would normally see in your classroom is you'll see that puzzled look on their faces. I can see you shaking your head, Yoram, from yes, I understand, that's the case. That gives me feedback. If I was busy doing something else and not watching the screen and watching my audience, yeah, I wouldn't be able to see that. So it's not the case that you have to multitask. If you're teaching, teach. There's no reason you have to do other things. That's the reason why I don't make polls when I do this. I don't want you to do something other, to be even enticed to look at your telephone. And I myself have the chat out. I have no idea what's going on behind me. And here would be no problem because everybody's writing in Ivrit and I can't read Ivrit. That's no problem. But if it's in a language that I understand, I will, of course, see it and see a word, and that will do it. So if you're a teacher and you say, we're going to make use of the chat, turn it off and say, okay, I've done it. Put on your chat. What didn't you understand? And now I'm dealing with the chat. I don't have to deal with it at the same time. So it's not true. You don't have to task switch while you're studying. You can serial monotask. You can do what you're doing, stop, and change over to something else. That's serial monotasking. That's not task switching or multitasking.
Great, thank you. I'll read a few comments from the chat since we only have 3-4 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
We have Alona Fokush Baruch, who wrote that I'd like to propose, while you were talking about digital natives and the myth of digital natives, she would like to propose that while what you're saying is relevant to this era of transition, as we go along the timeline, there will be a shift to digital culture. By this time, these results will change, so people might be more comfortable with digital reading. I know we have some researchers here who will support that and some who will provide evidence to the contrary. So, but I'm bringing people's words here.
The question of being more comfortable with something,
yep,
doesn't mean that your brain has changed.
Right.
Our brain hasn't changed in 10,000 years. Yeah?
Right. I think Alona refers to the fact that if people start reading digitally different early on, they might behave differently. But this is open for.
Okay, digital natives. Let's get this.
I don't like this term, but yeah.
But okay, those culturally savvy, media savvy. According to Prensky, that started in 1984. Everyone born after 1984 is a digital native, according to Mark Prensky. which means 37-year-olds are digital natives and have gone through this cultural acclimatization that we're talking about. Okay, so it's not.
I want to add to Paul's. I added a note about it.
Yes, you're next.
Referred to Paul's notion about digital natives and immigrants in the paper I wrote with Eran Chayut in 2009. I think we refuted experimentally the concept of immigrants and natives, but we wrote a paper called "You Can Teach Old Dogs New Tricks."
Of course.
That older people can perform much better with as young by experience. We were showing that the limiting factor here is experience with time, and it's not the way people were born.
Exactly.
It's a misleading concept.
I completely agree with you. I also did research on this, and I wrote something in which I said that the younger generation is fast with their fingers but slow with their mind. I am 69 and I'm probably more digitally savvy, which means I can make use in a more useful way of the digital media than most of the children around me, because I have the knowledge, I understand what I'm doing, as opposed to just doing things. So I agree with you. I would appreciate it if you would send me the article. I probably have read it. I don't know your name because Edith Nevo, but I would appreciate it if you would send it to me, email it to me.
I will.
It's a Paul at Kirschner.ed.nl, but you can find me on the web everywhere. But please,
I know you. We've met in the Netherlands.
Okay, sorry. A lot of people know me. That's different than I know a lot of people. But it's completely true what you say. It has nothing to do with when you're born. But what I didn't talk about, that digital reading, is that the research has found that having something in a book, in a physical thing, at a place on the page, stimulates your eidetic memory. Kind of like you say, I remember where I saw that. And if the pages continue to scroll, you don't have that. The physical topography of the book, the weight of the book, if it was the beginning or the end, it's kind of like a map if you compare it to reading a map to get somewhere or following Google Maps. If you've done it with a map, the second time or third time, you'll probably know how to get there. And if you've done it with Google Maps, the sixth time, you still have to listen to how Google tells you to get there. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with getting used to it. There are also very physical aspects of the topography and the weight and eidetic memory, which make it better to learn from printed materials than from electronic materials.
Paul, I will take it here. I'll take the moment to end the discussion. There were many thank yous on the chat, and you're welcome to have a look at them after the session or now. I think we enjoyed the talk very much, and but I hope the lions were tame. I believe we were. And I really, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you again for taking the time, for getting up early, for preparing, and for giving this interesting talk. I want to thank the audience for their gentleness and apologize for all those whom I couldn't read out. But there's a lot of stuff, and most of it is in English. So
okay.
Paul,
if anyone has a burning question, you can always mail me.
Great.
No problem. And then I will try to give an answer as quickly as possible to the question. I'm very good at that. And now you have a pause, so you can put it all on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And follow me on Twitter P_A_Kirschner.
But not while you're studying or teaching.
Not while you're studying. You now have a pause, I assume, Yoram.
Yes, I'll talk about that in Hebrew in a second. So again, thank you, Paul.
Okay.